By now, the whole world knows the Bush administration tortured people as part of its war on terror.
We do not torture.
By now, the whole world knows the Bush administration tortured people as part of its war on terror. While this was being done, President Bush repeatedly denied it.
We do not torture.
And repeatedly denied that what he and Vice President Cheney called enhanced interrogation techniques violated any laws.
What I've authorized is that we stay within U.S. law.
How could they deny they were breaking the law when U.S. law and international treaties clearly regard these practices as torture? Their denials relied on a series of secret memos from the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, or OLC. The authors were 3 OLC lawyers: Jay Bybee, whom Bush subsequently nominated to a lifetime appointment on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, Stephen Bradbury, and John Yoo. David Addington, Vice President Cheney's lawyer, is reported to have driven the process, working closely with the OLC lawyers to ensure they produced the legal cover for the Bush-Cheney torture policies. These 3 lawyers deny responsibility for the torture that followed their memos and claim they were simply giving the president their best legal advice. But others believe their work was part of a criminal conspiracy to distort the law to authorize torture, and are calling for a full investigation of the torture memos and their authors.
The Justice Department released the memos detailing interrogation techniques endorsed by the Bush administration. Jeff, you say you were outraged by these memos. There are a lot of people, though, listening to this who say, well, look, if this stopped, a terror attack from happening, if this worked, then maybe it's okay.
Well, A, there's no evidence that it stopped another terrorist attack. But B, torture is something that civilized countries don't do. Period. End of story. John McCain said it, Barack Obama said it, and the idea that we were waterboarding people at the same time we were condemning other countries for engaging in torture, I think is something that is totally indefensible and will be a black mark in this country for decades to come.
Waterboarding is flat out torture. And we just don't accept that, and it's something the United States should not do. The President of the United States told us we were not engaging in torture. We were.
Enhanced interrogation, harsh questioning techniques, extraordinary rendition. Now we know what they were really talking about. Throwing a man against a wall 30 times in a row, depriving a prisoner of sleep for 11 straight days, waterboarding one detainee 183 times. In a word, torture.
I find it beyond belief that anybody would countenance such torture. It was inaugurated by in the Spanish Inquisition. It was used by Pol Pot. It's not the America that I know that would countenance such torture. That's not the nation that I have fought for.
Torture became a pervasive practice. The FBI says so. The Red Cross says so. The Defense Intelligence Agency says so.
The memos are an ethical train wreck. OLC's job is not to rubber stamp administration policies, and it is not to provide legal cover for illegal actions. No lawyer's advice should do that. Unfortunately, the torture memos fall far short of professional standards of candid advice and independent judgment. They read as if they were reverse engineered to reach a predetermined outcome, approval of waterboarding and the other CIA techniques.
It appears that's exactly what Vice President Cheney had in mind. For as he said to the Washington Times, "We spent a great deal of time getting legal opinion out of the Office of Legal Counsel, and I think it produced the desired result."
Things can't work that way, or else someone could get a lawyer to say a crime is not a crime, and then that would be a defense. It is not a defense.
The principal author of the most outrageous document today was a guy named Jay Bybee, who In 2003, very shortly after this memo was published, he became a federal judge. He's now in the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. He will be there for life.
Him right there.
Yeah, he frankly got away with this before anybody knew he was involved, and it's really shocking.
You and other DOJ lawyers were part of a common plan to violate U.S. and international laws outlawing torture. It was reasonably foreseeable their advice would result in great physical or mental harm or death to many detainees.
So at some point this 2002 memo was implemented, is that right?
What do you mean by implemented, sir?
What I mean by implemented is the guidance that was set forth in that legal memorandum was followed and put into action. Do you understand what I mean by implemented now, sir?
So you're asking me what
I just told you were the legal techniques that you outlined in this memo employed.
Were the techniques that were legal? No, let me say this. We did not make decisions about policy.
I didn't ask you about that. I did not ask you about that, sir. I want to know if the legal advice that you gave in that memo was followed.
Anybody else in the world ever consider waterboarding not torture except this administration?
I am not aware of precedents that address the precise procedures used by the CIA. I'm simply not aware of precedents on point.
However, in U.S. versus Lee, the Reagan administration's Justice Department prosecuted and a jury convicted Texas Sheriff Carl Lee of violating a prisoner's civil rights by waterboarding him in order to get a confession.
Lee describes waterboarding and describes it as torture over and over again. And what's astonishing to me is that in 93 pages, they don't discuss a case on point in which one of the highest courts in the land, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, describes waterboarding and calls it repeatedly torture.
It raises the question of how we come to a place where the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel, an office that basically sets the standards for the whole federal government, came to write predetermined and premeditated legal opinions that allowed President Bush to authorize the torture of those in American custody and control.
I am a believer in the Constitution of the United States. I'm not a believer in torture. The two things are mutually exclusive. You can't have the Constitution of the United States on one hand and torture on the other and say them in the same breath as being on the same side. It's impossible.
Some want to turn their back on this trampling on the Constitution, on international treaties and our own laws. But how can we move forward without documenting what went wrong and holding accountable those who led America astray?
Well, certainly if you're going to prosecute people who carry out the acts, you must prosecute those who developed a policy and said it was okay to do these things.
Do you agree with me that waterboarding is torture and illegal?
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. Waterboarding is torture.
I think he needs to do a full investigation, determine what the facts are, and I feel most particularly, I guess, about the lawyers. Having a law degree shouldn't be a get-out-of-jail-free card, and the lack of sophistication and the way these lawyers bent over backwards to authorize things that if were done to the lawyers, they would certainly say was torture. If done to you or to me, would clearly be torture. I think really should not immunize them from responsibility of any form.
It is my responsibility as the Attorney General to enforce the law. It is my duty to enforce the law. If I see evidence of wrongdoing, I will pursue it to the full extent of the law.
The high officials of our government and the lawyers who advise them should be investigated and prosecuted by a special prosecutor for their roles in misusing the rule of law and legal analysis to justify torture and other crimes in flagrant violation of our laws.
Americans did not resolve to set aside our values or the Constitution after those vicious attacks. We didn't decide as a nation to stoop to the level of the terrorists. To the contrary, Americans have been united in their belief that an essential part of protecting the country for the future is safeguarding the ideals and the values that Americans stand for here at home.